Dear participants and friends, first of all, I'd like to thank Karmaura for his kind invitation and all the CBS team for the organization of this very inspiring conference. It's such an honor for us to be here today with you. So we are all aware in this room of the urgent need for ecological and social transformation. During the last decades, several movements intended to face this global challenge, SDGs, beyond GDP indicators, CSR, or citizens' action at the local level are among these movements. Nevertheless, the past achievements of such movements were not sufficient to invert social and ecological trends. The question today is how to provoke a paradigm shift, to use the words that of the report submitted in 2013 by Bhutan to the UN, as recalled yesterday by Walapa. A paradigm shift that transforms mindsets, consumer behavior, institutions, governance, and last but not least, business purpose and behavior. We believe that indicators can play a key role in such a process. Indicators are not only tools for planning and evaluating, they also explicitly or implicitly carry value framework while holding a discursive and legitimizing power. And they can be a unique way for bringing together different actors and helping them to coordinate. For these reasons, G&H of business is without any doubt a relevant and timely proposal, not only for Bhutan, but also for the global world. Of course, there are conditions for indicators to bring about a paradigm shift. Indicators need to clearly depart from the logic of GDP growth that prevailed for 7 decades and was consistent with profit-seeking on the business level. Indicators also need to go beyond CSR, which does not sufficiently challenge the core purpose of most businesses, as shown yesterday by Isabelle Sebastian and by some other speakers. Our assumption is that indicators will only help bring about a paradigm shift and will only orient business towards ecological and social transformation under 3 conditions. First, if they clearly embed non-profit or not-for-growth values. Second, if they contribute to the spreading of such values through stakeholders' involvement. And third, if they help the coordination across scales, namely the micro scale, including businesses and communities, and the macro scale, including nations and the global world. These 3 conditions constitute the backbone of our paper and help us to draw lessons from the comparisons of 2 well-known indicators. The paper, which is downloadable and on which we're thrilled to receive your comments, is structured as follows. First, we restate the distinction between micro and macro level indicators and discuss the main questions raised by attempts to bridge the gap between them. We then briefly present each of the 2 selected indexes, G&H Index and Social Progress Index. In the following sections, we take up the 3 points of comparison mentioned above, their embedded values, the stakeholders' involvement, and the coordination of multiple scales. Finally, in a concluding session, we gather a few lessons that can be drawn from this comparison for a G&H of business. I will very briefly go through the 2 first points, taking them together, then hand over to Olivier for the following 4 points. We have chosen to compare the G&H Index and the Social Progress Index because they both have the ability to bridge the gap that currently exists between the policy level indicators, namely the beyond GDP indicators, and the business level indicators such as CSR reporting grids. G&H is currently showing this ability through the very fact of this conference and through CBS proposed G&H of business released last Monday. SPI shows the ability to bridge the gap between the macro and the micro level, as it is, to our knowledge one of the first beyond GDP indexes supported and used by businesses. I guess it is not necessary to describe the G&H index to this audience. Let me briefly present the SPI to those of you who are not familiar with. SPI is a composite index that has been updated every year since 2013 for 133 countries. It was developed by the non-profit Social Progress Imperative, a coalition bringing together large private businesses or their foundations, as well as academics from among the most prestigious universities. Like the G&H index, its ambition is to provide a holistic indicator of social and environmental performance that can be used by governments, NGOs, and businesses. Social Progress Index is structured around three dimensions, 12 components, and 50 indicators. At first glance, most of the components are close to those encompassed in the G&H index, such as health, education, environmental quality. Nevertheless, a close comparison of G&H and SPI according to the three conditions for paradigm shift that I mentioned previously shows wide differences between the indexes. I will leave this comparison to Olivier, who has done most of the work behind this paper. As you know, PhD students usually score very bad on time use indicator, as their promoter encouraged them to work day and night on their research, of course, which I did. So, Olivier, you have the floor.
Okay. Olivier Malay, he is a PhD student in economics at the Hoover Chair of Social and Economic Ethics in the University of Louvain, Belgium. He holds degree in economics, politics, and political philosophy. His main research interests are beyond GDP and CSR indicators and interdisciplinary research in economics. He has been awarded the prize for the best student paper by the European Society of Ecological Economics to his paper. So please welcome Olivier.
Thank you very much. Let's return to the three issues highlighted by Isabelle, where she stated the importance to design indexes such that the values they carry tend towards a paradigm shift. For instance, when we compare G&H and Social Progress Index, we observe that they both claim to orient society towards happiness. However, when we look more closely at their variables, we see that they have two different approaches. Both G&H and SPS include living standard variables, health, education, and other issues. However, the particularity of G&H index, as you know, is that it puts emphasis on spirituality, community, and the thresholds that it contains have a tendency towards sufficiency. On the other hand, SPI highlights the importance of individual rights and freedoms, tolerance, and access to advanced education. So they don't interpret happiness in the same way, and it has huge impact on the outcomes of the two indexes. We show that in detail in the paper, but at the end of the day, SPI appears as an index embodied in liberal values, and it is strongly correlated to GDP, more than 90%. So they don't indicate the same way for a society. We have two indexes talking about happiness, but SPI does not seem as the best suited to indicate a paradigm shift. This is said at the global level, but the same issue also appears at the same level in the choice of a firm level reporting grid. How to design a firm level certification that indicates a real transformation and that is not just an EU CSR reporting tool. We believe that a firm level indicator can orient businesses towards a goal such as G&H if and only if it's not composed only by variables that boost profit. Today, there exist plenty of CSR grids, including only variables that boost profit, such as efficient use of energy, workers' training, or team spirit. All these indicators induce no ethical commitment, even if they include social and environmental variables. They are part of strategies that aim to maximize profit, like in business as usual. But they are clever strategies in the sense that they know how to exploit the potential of social and environmental issues in order to increase profits. Still, it's profit maximization, and there is no change in the ethics of the firm. So a claim would be that if a reporting grid really wants to carry new values, it should also account for variables that are not linked to profit, and maybe also include some variables that can hamper profit if it's to solve social and environmental challenges we face. Variables such as wage gap between the CEO and the workers, variables that assess the carbon neutrality of firms, these kind of variables. Unfortunately, in the new GNH certification tool, such variables are present. So the key message here would be to be very careful in the choice of the variables in the indexes and choose variables and thresholds that really matter for a paradigm shift. I come to our second point, which is about stakeholders' involvement. How can indexes gather stakeholders in order to increase the network in which they can share their values? Today, GNH is used by the Bhutanese government, and it's one of the only Beyond GDP index that is used as a real policy tool. How? One reason is that CBS included officials, policymakers, and even the population at some point in the construction of the index. GNH index is thus a reflection of its potential users and is thus accurate for policy use. However, in the new GNH certification, it looks like firms have not been so much included in the construction process. In the case of SPI, it is the contrary. It is an index that has been built by a coalition that includes large companies, Cisco, Deloitte, Rockefeller Foundation, Skoll Foundation, Avina Foundation. So the index could access the large networks and credibility of these firms, and it is now used in more than 10 countries by firms and public officials. Another thing has been done by the Social Progress Imperative to include stakeholders and bring them together. Social Progress Imperative, I give you an example in Brazil. Social Progress Imperative gathered in Amazonia 3 big firms in order to create a social progress index for 2 Indian communities. The firms were interested because they wanted to improve their CSR tools. So in order to create the index, they ran interviews, surveys, met people, and learned to work together. They created the index. And the index could show, like other index, which were the social and ecological issues at stake for the population. But more importantly, the firms and the actors that were gathered during the creation process took actions in order to improve the situation. In fact, the index was a pretext to meet, discuss, involve new actors, and make them act.
2 minutes.
So, the key message here is that if we want to increase the network and to increase the probability that the index will be used, we should involve actors from the beginning of the construction of the index. And we should engage and take each opportunity to increase the network. Our third point concerns the articulation of the multiple scales of these indexes. How to articulate the micro and the micro scales, as well as GDP does. So both of them are calculated at national and other levels. How to articulate that complexity? They both use the same method. At every level, they keep the same name, the same structure, the same theoretical framework, same coordinating organization, and the same domains, and even the subdomains in the SPA case. So it permits to be accurate and to tackle the best variables possible, and at the same time, it permits to keep the same network, the same philosophy, and the same toolbox with policy propositions. So this way of doing things increases the visibility and the network of the index, which in return helps the paradigm shift to increase. So the key message here is that these two indexes are on the right track. So what to conclude from all this? First, that the proposition made by CBS on Monday is relevant and timely. It is at the forefront of the development of the tools needed to face social, ecological, and broader anthropological challenges. And one main strength of GNH is the values it carries, adequate for that goal. But other indexes also have strengths, and in this case the SPI, it is its capacity to develop a large network and to involve many stakeholders. And both of these indexes have common strengths, namely their actionability and the way they can coordinate different scales. So to conclude, on one hand, Bhutan could learn from SPI how to networking with stakeholders could help spreading the desired values, especially for the new certification. And on the other hand, the world could learn from Bhutan how the values embedded in GNH are a powerful way towards a paradigm shift. Thank you very much.